guys, it's Sunday Reading Day, and today we're going to be reading from St. Andrew's Ghost Stories, Ghost Legends of Scotland. Be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. Happy Sunday. How's everybody doing? I hope you said great. Let me make an adjustment over here. I know it's going to be kind of bright, but I'm just going to brighten it up a little bit over here. So just give me a second. Just a tad. Okay. So you can just brighten it up a little bit. It's not too bad. Anyway, welcome. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. We're running a little behind tonight. I apologize. I had some technical difficulties getting things set up. Just as an FYI, we are broadcasting on five different networks today. 5 different networks. So we're having a bunch of fun. Okay? So, welcome TikTok. Welcome the other app. I do have a goal of 20 bears. If you guys could help me out with that, that would be great. You're not required a gift, but just know if you do, it goes to my paranormal team and not me. It's just I'm just volunteering my time. Same thing over here at TikTok. I do have a goal of 10 corgis, so if you could help me out with that during the reading, it'd be great. So what we're doing tonight is this is Sunday. Sunday we always read from a paranormal themed book. Sometimes the stories aren't real. Sometimes they are real. In this case, this is a book from Scotland. It was written in the early 1900s, and it's called St. Andrew's Ghost Stories. Now, a lot of these ghost stories, and you know what I forgot to do, so I got so excited and ahead of myself. Hang on. This is what happens when I get ahead of myself. I was kicking back because I thought I had all this stuff done. Little did I know. Okay. Okay. There we go. All the right buttons. Okay. Anyway, so some of these stories you've probably seen on different TV shows. I know Haunted History has featured some of these stories, and I've seen them there. And then there's one in here in particular that kind of matches up to something that goes on here in Northern California, where my paranormal team is located. And it has to do with the Screaming Skull. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read for about an hour. So I hope you enjoy it. And if anybody gifts or anything like that, I cannot see the screen. So thank you ahead of time. Thank you for the team cheers. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. Thank you for the team cheers. So I do have moderators over on TikTok. So keep an eye on things and thank people for any gifts that might come. Okay? I do apologize for that, but I'm a blind bat when it comes to that. That's why I have to have reading glasses normally. All right, so we're going to read from this book. This is day 2. We may finish today, as there's only like about five stories in here, and then we'll be moving on to another book. All right, so without further ado, let's read from St. Andrew's Ghost Stories, and this is all taking place in Scotland, okay? And again, because this is early 1900, please bear with me. I will slow down at times because I have to watch how I say things. I don't want to get in trouble on any of the apps, as far as what is said, okay? All right, so here we go. This is the true tale of the Phantom Coach. The great curtain had fallen after the pantomime, and I was standing chatting on and after the pantomime, we're standing on the stage of the theater at Cambridge, when one of the stage men came to tell me I was wanted at the stage door and I must hurry up at once. Thither I proceeded, and found a lot of golfing boys, hunting boys, dramatic boys, and all sorts of other merry varsity boys, who shouted out, "Come along quick to the Blue Pig." The Blue Pig is a Cambridge name for the Blue Boar Hotel. We want you to meet a fellow called Willie Carson, and there is to be supper, and he has something to tell us. The boogeyman has gone on there now, so come right away. Well, off we went to the Blue Boar Hotel, and we found Carson sitting over a blazing fire with a capital supper set in his nice old-fashioned room, lit up with candles only. The picture of comfort. Outside it was snowing hard and bitterly cold. After a talk over the merits of the pantomime, we did full justice to a most excellent supper, and then crowded round the blazing hearth to hear a story that our host wanted to tell us. Did you ever hear of the Phantom Coach at St. Andrews? He asked, turning to me suddenly and removing a cigar. Often, I replied. I've heard of most extraordinary yarns about it from lots of people. But why do you ask? Because I've seen it, he replied. Some 5 years ago, it was very, very strange, not to be forgotten, and quite unexplainable. That is why I asked you here tonight. I wanted to talk to you about it. He stooped over the fire and was silent for a few minutes. Tell us all about it, we all shouted at once. We won't make fun of it. And by the way, these are available at Project Gutenberg online. If you Google, these are free because they're out of copyright. There's nothing to make fun of, indeed. It's a true solemn fact, he said. Listen, and I will tell you what I saw, but I can't half picture it properly. 5 years ago, I had just come home from America. I went to stay here at St. Andrews for some golf. I think it was the latter end of August, and I must have been in the town about a week at least, when one night it was hot and stuffy, and about midnight, I decided to take a good long country walk, and struck out right along the road to Strathkinnis. It was a hot, dark, and stormy night, not wet. Fitful black clouds floated now and again at a rapid pace over the moon, which now and then shone out brightly. In the distance, the sea made a perpetual moan, and at intervals the dark eastern sky was lit up by flashes of summer wildfire lightning over the distant cathedral towers. Now and again I could hear the mutter of faraway thunder, and there were incessant gusts of wind. I must have been about 2 miles along the road when I could discern some very large object approaching me rapidly. As it came nearer, I noticed it resembled a coach, dark, heavy, primitive. It seemed to have 4 large black horses, and the driver was a muffled, shapeless figure. It approached with a low humming or buzzing sound which was most peculiar and unpleasant to hear. The horses made a hollow kind of ticking sound with their feet. Otherwise, it was noiseless. No earthly coach of the kind could go without any ordinary sound. It was weird and eerie in the extreme. As it passed me, the moon shone out brightly, and I saw for a second a ghastly white face at the coach window. But I saw those 4 strange, silent black horses, the more extraordinary, tall, swaddled up, shapeless driver, and the quaint black, gloomy old coach, with a coffin-shaped box on the roof, only far, far too well. One most remarkable thing was that it threw no shadow of any kind. Just as it passed me, there was a terrific roar of thunder, and a blaze of lightning that nearly blinded me, and in the distance I saw that horrible, ghastly, receding coach. Then clouds came over the moon, and all was black. A darkness one could feel, a darkness of a shut-up, smoldering vault. I felt sick and dazed for a minute or two. I could not make out if I had been struck by the lightning or was paralyzed. However, after a bit it passed off. It was a horrible, deathly feeling while it lasted. I never experienced a similar sensation before or since, and hope I never may again. Another very curious thing was the behavior of my favorite collie dog, usually frightened nothing. On the approach of the phantom, for the phantom it was, he crouched down, shivering and whining, and, as it drew nearer, fled with a bark like a screech, and cowered down in the ditch at the roadside, and gave forth low growls. I tell you, boys, it's all right in this room to talk about it, but none of you would have liked to be in my place that queer, uncanny night on that lonely road. That it was supernatural, I am convinced. It is a very thin veil between us and the unseen world of spirits. They say I possess the seventh sense, namely, second sight, and I know I shall never forget that night's experience. But listen, the story is not ended yet. Next morning a telegram arrived from my brother in Kent. Are you all right? I wondered much, and wired back that I was very well. The following day a letter came from my brother giving me a curious explanation. The following afternoon of the day I saw the coach, my brother was looking out of the old manor house windows in Kent when he and several others noticed a large bird, having most peculiar plumage, seated on the garden wall. No one had ever seen a bird of the kind before. He was rushing off for a gun to shoot it, when our father, who looked very white and scared, stopped him. Don't shoot, he said. it would be of no use. That is the bird of ill omen to all of our race. It only appears before a death. I have only once seen it before, that week your dear mother died. My brother was so alarmed at this that he sent the wire I have mentioned to me at St. Andrews. By the next mail from Australia, we learned that our eldest brother had died there the very day I saw the coach at St. Andrews, and my brother saw the bird at our old home. Very odd, is it not? But what do you know about that coach? Only tales, I said. Many people swear they have heard it or seen it on stormy nights. I know a girl who swears to it, and also a doctor who passed it on the road, and it nearly frightened his horse to death, and him too. The tale of the two tramps is funny. They were trudging into St. Andrews one wild stormy night when this uncanny coach overtook them. It stopped, the door opened, and a white hand beckoned towards them. One tramp rushed up and got in. Then suddenly the door noiselessly shut, and the coach moved off, leaving the other tramp alone in the pitiless wind and rain. I never saw my old mate again, said the tramp, and I never shall. That old coach was nothing of this here world of ours. It took my old mate off the Davy Jones locker, mighty smart, poor fellow. They say his body was found in the sea some months afterwards, and the tale goes that the Phantom Coach finishes off its nocturnal journey in the waves of St. Andrews Bay. Whose coach is it? Asked all that were in the room. I can't say. Some say Bethune's, others Sharp, and others Haxton. I do not know who is supposed to be the figure inside, unless it is his satanic majesty himself. At all events, it seems a certain fact that a phantom coach has been seen from time to time on the roads round St. Andrews. I've never seen any of these things myself. Well, said Carson, that awful coach does appear. It appeared to me, and, doubtless, in the course of time will appear to many others. It bodes no one any good, and I pity with all my heart anyone who meets it. Beware of those roads late at night, or like me, you may some day, to your injury, meet that ghastly, uncanny old phantom coach. If so, you will remember it to your dying day. Curious thing about seeing the coach and the bird at the same time, and in two places so far apart, murmured the golfing Johnny, and then Carson's brother dying too. I'd sooner see the bird than the coach, said one. Guess I'd rather not see either of them, said an American peasant. Glad we have no phantom coaches in the Yankee land. See, they still called us Yankees back then. Okay? So here we go. This next one is the Veiled Nun of St. Leonard's. Curiously enough, although I have been in many old haunted castles and churches, at the exact correct hour, viz. Midnight, in Scotland, England, Wales, and the Rhine country, yet I've never been able to either see or hear a ghost of any sort. The only thing of this kind I ever saw was an accidental meeting with the far-famed Spring-Heeled Jack in a dark lane at Helensburgh. It was many years ago, and I was then very small, and he was of immense proportions. The meeting was distinctly unpleasant for me. Now, from legends, we learn that St. Andrews is possessed of a number of supernatural appearances of different kinds, sizes, and shapes, most of them of an awe-inspiring and blood-curdling type. In fact, so numerous are they, 80 in number, they seem to be, that there are really no room for any modern aspirants who may want a quiet place to appear and turn people's hair white. It might be well to mention a few of them before telling the tale of the Veiled Nun of St. Leonard's Church Avenue. We will put aside ordinary banshees and things that can only be heard. Well, there is the celebrated phantom coach that Willie Carson told us of. It has been heard and seen by many. There is also a white lady that used to haunt the Abbey Road, the ghost of St. Rule's Tower, the haunted tower ghost, the Blackfriars ghost, and the wraith of Haxton, the spectre of the old castle, the dancing skeletons, the smothered Piper lad. I remember that one. The phantom bloodhound, the priory ghost, and many, many more. The Nun of St. Leonard's is as curious and interesting as any of them, though a bit weird and gruesome. This is where I got to be careful, you guys, okay? In the time of charming Mary Stuart, our White Queen, there lived in the old South Street a very lovely lady belonging to a very old Scottish family. And her beauty and wit brought many admirers to claim her hand, but with little or no success. She waved them all away. At last she became affianced to a fine and brave young fellow who came from East Lothian country, and for some months all went merrily as a marriage bell. But, at last, clouds overspread the rosy horizon. She resolved that she would never become an earthly bride, but would take the veil and become a bride of Holy Church, a nun, in point of fact. When her lover heard that she had left home and entered a house of holy sisters, he at once announced his intention of hastening to St. Andrews, seizing her and marrying her at once. In this project, it would seem the young lady's parents were in perfect agreement with the devoted youth. He did hasten to St. Andrews almost immediately, and there received a terrible shock. On meeting this once lovely and loved maiden, he discovered that she had actually done what she had written and threatened to do. Sooner than be an earthly bride, she had mutilated her face by by by. This is gonna be hard to say because I don't want to get nailed. Okay, so don't turn me into the police. All right, to the internet police. Okay, she had mutilated her face by doing. I'm gonna just say this: doing something to her nose. We're just gonna say that. All right, she had removed her eyelids and both her top and bottom lips, and had branded her fair cheeks with cruel hot irons. The poor youth, on seeing her famous beauty thus destroyed, fled to Edinburgh, where he had unalived himself. And she, after becoming a nun, died from grief and remorse. That all happened nearly 400 years ago, but her spirit, with the terribly marred and mutilated face, still wanders o' nights in the peaceful little avenue to old St. Leonard's iron kirk gate, down to Penn's Road. She is all dressed in black, with a long black veil over her once lovely face, and carries a lantern in her hand. Should any bold visitor to that avenue meet her, she slowly sweeps her face veil aside, raises the lantern to her scarred face, and discloses those awful features to his horrified gaze. Here is a curious thing that I know happened there a few years ago. I knew a young fellow here who was reading up theology and church canon law. I also knew a great friend of his, an old Cambridge man. The former I will call Wilson, and the latter Talbot, as I do not want to give the exact names. Well, Wilson had invited Talbot up to St. Andrews for a month of golf, and he arrived here on Christmas Day. He came to my rooms for about 10 minutes, and I never saw any one merrier and brighter and full of the old days at Cambridge. Then he hurried off to see the links and the club. Late that evening, Wilson rushed in. "Come along quick and see Talbot. He's awfully ill, and I don't know what's up a bit." I went off and found Talbot in his lodgings, with a doctor in attendance, and he certainly looked dangerously ill, and seemed perfectly dazed. Wilson told me he had to go see some people on business that evening down by the harbour, and that he took Talbot with him down to Penn's Road. It was a fine night, and Talbot said he would walk about the road and enjoy a cigar till his friends returned. In about half an hour, Wilson returned up the Penn's Road, but could see Talbot nowhere in sight. After hunting for a long time, he found him leaning against the third or fourth tree up the little avenue to the St. Leonard's Kirk gate. He went up to him, when Talbot turned a horrified face toward him, saying, "Oh, my God, have you come to me again?" and fell down in a fit or swoon. He got some passers-by to help take poor Talbot to his rooms. Then he came round for me. We sat up with him in wonder and amazement, and, briefly, this is what he told us. After walking up and down the Penn's Road, he thought he would take a survey of the little avenue, when at the end he saw a light approaching him, and he turned back to meet it. Thinking it was a policeman, he wished him good evening, but got no reply. On approaching nearer, he saw it to be a veiled female with a lantern. Getting quite close, she stopped in front of him, drew aside her long veil, and held up the lantern towards him. "My God," said Talbot, "I could never forget or describe that terrible, fearful face. I felt choked, and I fell like a log at her feet. I remember no more till I found myself in these rooms, and you two fellows sitting beside me. I leave this place tomorrow," and he did by the first train. His state of panic was terrible to see. Neither Wilson nor Talbot had ever heard the tale of the awful apparition of the St. Leonard's nun, and I had almost forgotten the existence of the strange story till so curiously reminded of it. I never saw Talbot again, but I had a letter from him a year after written from Brianfels, telling me that on Christmas Day he had had another vision, dream, or whatever it was, of the same awful spectre. About a year later, I read in a paper that poor old Talbot had died on Christmas night at Rosario of heart failure. At Rosario of heart failure. I often wonder if the dear old chap had another visit from the terrible veiled nun of St. Leonard's Avenue. Wow. Okay. Next story is The Monk of St. Rule's Tower. I love ghost stories too. Love ghost stories. Some years ago, I was perfectly surrounded with crowds of bonny children in the St. Albans Holborn district of London. I fancy they belonged to some guild or other, and they enacted the part of imps, fairies, statues, and other things in various pantomimes in neighboring theaters. I had been invited there to amuse the kiddies with songs and imitations, and now they were all shrieking and yelling at the top of their voices for a ghost story. It's getting near Christmas, they all shouted, and we all wanted to hear about ghosts, real creepy ghosts. I pointed out the fact that most ghost stories were bunkum, and that such tales were very apt to keep wee laddies and lassies awake at night. But bless you, they wouldn't listen to that one bit. They wanted ghosts, and ghosts they would have. Well, in about an hour, I had yarned off most of my best boogie stories. I had used up most of my tales regarding Scottish, English, and continental castles, and the banshees, water kelpies, wraiths, and anything connected therewith. But still, those children, like Oliver Twist, demanded more. I really was fairly stumped when, all of a sudden, my mind flew back to 1875, when a strange story was told me by Captain Chester in the council grounds of beautiful Baden-Baden. I first fell in love with this dear old warrior in Rome, and we became firm friends and traveled together for many cheery weeks. He told me his queer tale in the very strongest of military language, which I must admit, the language would be suitable to use in bunkers, but not on paper. So it was a sultry day, so were his remarks. It would seem that many years before he had visited Scotland and England to try and see a ghost or two. He had been to Cumnorhurst in order to investigate the appearance of the ill-fated Amy Robsart. He went to the Rainham Hall to interview the famous brown lady, and he journeyed to Hampton Court to hear the shrieking ghost, and also went to Church Strelton to see if he could fix the ghost at the Copper Hole. In Scotland, he followed the scent of various ghosts, and finally landed at St. Andrews. By Jove, sir, he said, that's the place for ghosts. Every blessed corner is full of them. Bang full. Look at those fellows in the castle dungeons, and Beaton and Sharp, and the men that got hanged and burned, and the old witches. I saw my ghost there. Years and years ago, I took an old house in St. Andrews, which was a small place then. Very little golf was played, and there was very little to do. But gad, sir, the ghosts were thick, and the quaint old bodies of the town were full of them. They could spin yarns for hours about phantom coaches, death knells, corpse candles, people going about in winding sheets, and phantom hearses, and Lord knows what else. I loved it. It took me quite back to the Middle Ages. So I told these children Captain Chester's tale, as nearly as possible in his own words, minus the forcible epithets. I managed to hit off his voice and manner, and this in particular seemed to amuse them. Egad, sir, he said, it was a curious time. Of all the tales I heard, the one that pleased and fascinated me most was the legend of the monk that looks over St. Regulus's tower on moonlight nights. I went thither every night, and constantly fancied I saw a figure peering over the edge, but was not certain. Then I got hold of a very old man, who related to me the old legend. It seems that years ago there was a good prior of St. Andrews named Robert de Montrose. He ruled well and gently and wisely. But among the monks there was one who was always in hot water, and whom Prior Robert had often to haul over the coals. He played practical jokes often absented himself from the daily and nightly offices of Holy Kirk, and otherwise upset the rules and discipline. Finally, when Earl Douglas and his retinue came to St. Andrews to present to the cathedral a costly statue, long known as the Douglas Lady, this monk made desperate love to one of the waiting women of the Lady Douglas. For this he was imprisoned in the priory dungeon for some days. It was the custom of Robert de Montrose almost every fine night to ascend the tower of St. Rule and admire the view. The summit was reached in those days by means of ladders and wooden landings, not, as it is now, by a stair. In those days, too, the apse and part of the nave were still standing, and the summit of the solemn old tower was crowned by a small spire. One evening, just before Yuletide, when the prior, as usual, was on the top of the tower, the contumacious monk slyly followed him up the ladders, stabbed him in the back with a small dagger, and flung him over the north side of the old tower. I thought, Captain Chester, I said, that the murder took place on the dormitory stairs. Gadzooks! An old bodkin, sir. I'm telling you what I was told, and what I can prove, sir. All right, I replied. Please fire away. Well, continued Chester, they told me the prior had been seen peeping over the tower, and at times he was seen to fall, as he did years ago, from the summit. By and by, his assassin was starved to death and buried in some old mine. On moonlit nights, as my brother and I were standing on the Kirkhill, to our horror and amazement, we saw a figure appear suddenly on the top of the tower, leap to the parapet, and deliberately jump over. Zounds, sir, my blood ran cold. We did not hesitate long, but jumped the low wall of the cathedral. It was easily done in those days, and we were young and active, and hurried to the grim old tower. Just as we neared it, a monk passed us in the Augustinian habit. His cowl was thrown back, and for just 1 second we had a view of his pallid, handsome face and keen, penetrating eyes. Then he disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. We were alone in the moonlight, nothing stirring. That is very odd, I said. Zooks, sir, I have odder things still to tell you. We went home to the old house, had supper, and retired to bed thoughtfully. I woke about 2 a.m. The blinds were up, and it was as clear as day, with the moonlight. Imagine my blank astonishment when I clearly perceived, leaning up against the mantelpiece, the pallid monk I had seen a few hours before near the square tower. He leaned on his elbow and was gazing intently at me, while in his hand he held some objects that had a blue glitter in the moonbeams. He smiled. Fear not, brother, he said. I am Prior Robert of Montrose, who quitted this earth many years since, and of whom you have been talking and thinking so much of late days. I saw you tonight in our cruelly ruined Abbey Kirk. Alas, alas. But I come from ayont the distant hills and have far to go tonight. What do you want, Holy Father? I said, and what of your murderer? That is forgiven and forgotten long time ago, he said, and I love to revisit at times my old haunts, and so does he. You have, in your regiment, methinks, one named Montrose, a scion of our family. Yes, I said, I know a Bob Montrose well. See you this dagger I hold, said Prior Robert. It was with this I lost my life on this earth many years ago on the tower of blessed St. Rule. They buried it with me in my stone kist. I will leave it here with you to give to my kinsman, for it will prove of use to him ere he passes hence. Mark my words. He raised his hand in an act of blessing, and melted away. I fell back, in a sleep or in a faint. When I awoke, the morning sun was streaming into my bedroom. At first, I thought I had eaten too much supper, and had had a nightmare. But there on the table, by my bed, lay an old dagger of curious workmanship. The dagger that slew the prior years and years ago. I faithfully fulfilled my vow, and my friend, Major Bob Montrose, has now got his monkish ancestor's dagger. That's all Captain Chester told me, dear children. Goodbye. Don't forget me, and do not forget old St. Andrew's ghost, the tower of St. Rule, and the spectre of Prior Robert of Montrose. Then a modern, handsome whirled me away to King's Cross. Another story related by Captain Chester. In my travels, I have met many very extraordinary and remarkable people with hobbies and fads of various kinds, but I never met a man of such curious personality as this old friend of mine, Captain Chester. All of his methods and ideas were purely original. Everyone has some hobby. His hobby was ghost and spook hunting. We were sitting one lovely September evening in the gardens of one of the hotels at Bonn, which stretched down the river Rhine, listening to the band and watching the great rafts coming down the river from the Black Forest. "By Jove, sir," said the old man, "I have shot big game in the Rockies, and hunted tigers, and all that sort of thing, but, zooks, sir, I prefer hunting ghosts any day. That Robert de Montrose was the first I saw. There are shoals of these shades about, a perfect army of them everywhere, especially in St. Andrews. Gad, sir, you should hear the banshee shrieking at night in the Irish bogs. I don't believe in your infernal sea serpents, but I've seen water kelpies in the Scottish and American lakes." I told him I had never heard of a banshee or seen a water kelpie. "Very likely, sir, very probable. Everyone can't see and hear these things. I can." I told him I'd never seen a disembodied spirit, and didn't want to. "Gad zook, sir, I consider disinspirited bodies far worse. They are quite common. I allude to human bodies that have lost their spirits or souls, and yet go about among us. Zounds, sir, my cousin is one of them. Ah," he continued, "detached personality is a curious thing. I can detach my personality, can you?" "Most certainly not," I said. "What the deuce do you mean?" "Mean," he said. "I mean my spirit can float out of my body at will. My spirit becomes a sort of mental balloon. I can then defy destiny." "How in thunder do you manage to do it anyway?" "By practice, sir. Of course, when my spirit floats out of my body, I can see my own body sitting in my armchair, and an ugly old wreck of a body it is. It is bad for one, I admit. It is very weakening. Another thing may happen. Another wandering spirit may suddenly take possession of one's body, and then one's own spirit can't get back again, and it becomes a wandering spirit, and is always trying to force itself into other people's bodies. Then one's spirit gets into a mental bunker, you see?" "I don't see a bit. It is most unpleasant. Tell me about ghosts you have seen, and about that dagger you gave to Major Montrose." "Oh, so then you're not interested in eliminated personality?" "Not a bit," I said. "I don't know what it is. Tell me about that dagger for a change." "Oh, well, the dagger Robert of Montrose gave me proved of great use to my old friend Bob Montrose on many occasions. It had a wonderful power of its own. Once he got into a broil with a lot of Spanish fellows one night, and as he was unarmed at the time, he was in a remarkably tight corner. Suddenly, something slipped into his hand, and, by Jove, it was the dagger. And that dagger saved his life. Another time, he found himself in an American train with a raving lunatic, and if it had not been for the protecting dagger, he'd have been torn limb from limb. After that, he took it everywhere with him. Where is it now? Well, there's an odd thing, if you like. Bob died in the Isle of France, where Paul and Virginia used to be. He was killed by a fall and is buried there. He left the dagger to me in his will, but no human eyes have ever seen that dagger since his death. It may have been stolen, or it may have gone back to where it came from, into Robert of Montrose's stone kist. Probably its usefulness was at an end, and it was needed no more. Bob told me one queer thing about that dagger. Once a year, near Christmas-tide, the dagger hung on the wall of his bedroom. It used to exude a thick reddish fluid like blood, which used to cover the blade in large drops, and it remained so for several hours, and, again, sometimes at night, it used to shine with a bright light of its own. "That is indeed wonderful," I said, lighting another cheroot. "But tell me more about the St. Andrew's bogles, astral bodies, dual personality, and things of the sort." "Well, That is odd, he said. I love them. When I was in St. Andrews, I rented a fine old house with huge thick walls, big fireplaces, funny corkscrew stairs, such rum holes in corners, and a big vaulted kitchens. It's all pulled down now, I believe, and a brand new house built there. But I hear the vaulted rooms below are left exactly as they were. People didn't take to the old house. They heard noises and rappings, and saw things in the night, and so on. We all saw things. My brother met the ghost of a horrible-looking old witch, quite in the orthodox dress of the witch hill above the witch lake. It upset him terribly, at the time, made him quite ill. Nerves went all to pot. Would not sleep in a room by himself after that. He made me devilish angry, sir, I can tell you. Perhaps it was Mother Alison Craig, a well-known witch, who was burnt there. Likely enough, sir, it may have been the old cat you mentioned, an old hag. Then my nephew and I saw that phantom coach in the walk one walk one windy moonlight night. It passed us very quickly, but made a deuced row, like a lifeboat carriage. What was it like? Like a huge black box with windows in it, and a queer light inside. It reminded me of a great coffin. Ugly-looking affair. Very uncanny thing to meet at that time of night, and in such a lonely spot. It was soon gone, but we heard its rumbling noise for a long time. What were the horses like? Shadowy-looking, black things, like great black beetles with long, thin legs. And what was the driver like? He was a tall, thin, black object also, like a big black lank lobster, with a cocked hat on the top. That's all I could see. On the top of the coach was an object that looked like a gigantic tarantula spider, with a head like a moving gargoyle. I can't get at the real history of that mysterious old coach yet. I don't believe it has anything whatsoever to do with the murdered prelates, Beaton or Sharp. However, the coach does go about. Another wraith I saw at the Castle St. Andrews was that of James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, third husband of Mary, Queen of Scots. He lies buried in the crypt of Fairvale, church, close to the catgut. Before his death, he was a prisoner at Malmo. Then he was sent to Denmark and died in the dungeon of the state prison at Drusholm. I'm awfully interested, I said, about those times, and in Bothwell and Mary in particular. Odds fish, sir, said Chester, so am I. I went to Farvale to see Bothwell's well-preserved body. The verger took me down a trapdoor near the altar, and there it lies in a lidless box, a very fine face with a cynical and mocking mouth. He murdered Darnley, and he was treated and buried as a murderer in those bygone days. At Malmo, folks say he was tormented by the ghosts of his mad wife, Jane Huntley, and by Darnley. He ended his days in misery, and served him devilish well right, say I. I love and revere lovely Mary Stuart. Darn it, sir, he deserted her when she was in a fix at Carberry Hill, the curmudgeon. But what of the appearances of the Earl you saw? Met him twice at the castle, no mistaking him. A big, knightly, handsome fellow. Spirits can easily at times assume their earthly form and dress. I recognized him at once. The sneering lips and all. Just like his old pictures, too. When he glided past me, his teeth were chattering like a dice box, and the wind was whistling through his neck bones. I addressed him boldly by name, but he melted away. One sees these apparitions with one's mental eyes. I saw him again leaning against the door that leads to that obulet in the sea tower of the castle. Egad, sir, he exactly resembled the body I saw in the old crypt at Farvale. He often appears there, and at Hermitage Castle also. No mistake, sir. That was Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell. I may tell you some other time. It's getting very late now. Of the ghosts I saw in my house at St. Andrews, and of the prior or monk of Pittenweed. But I must turn into bed now. I go to see the service at the cathedral here early tomorrow. Then the tall figure of Captain Chester strode away and left me alone to my meditations. Well, I suppose if I had been Captain Chester, Left alone there in those gardens, I'd have seen a ghost or two with my mental eyes. But instead, I saw a fat waiter approaching who told me my supper awaited me. The Screaming Skull of Greyfriars. I never met a better fellow in the world than my old friend, Alan Beauchamp. He had been educated at Eton and Magdalen at Oxford, after which he joined a crack regiment and later on took it into his head to turn doctor. He was a great traveler and magnificent athlete. There was no game in which he did not excel. Curiously enough, he hated music. He had no ear for it, and he did not know the difference between the airs of Tommy, Make Room for Your Uncle, and The Lost Chord. He was tremendously proud of his pedigree. He had descended from the Beauchamps, and one of his ancestors, he gravely informed people, had helped Noah to get the wasps and elephants into the ark. Another of them seems to have been not very far away in the Garden of Eden. In fact, they seem to have been quite prehistoric. He was quite cracked on the subject of brain transference, telepathy, spiritualism, ghosts, warnings, and the like. And on these points, he was most uncanny and fearsome. The literature he had about them was blood-curdling. He believed in dual personality and in visions, horoscopes, and dreams. He showed me a pamphlet he had written entitled The Toad-Faced Demon of Lone Devil's Dyke. He was always flitting about Britain, exploring haunted houses and castles, and sleeping in haunted rooms when it was possible. Some years ago, Beauchamp and myself, accompanied by his faithful valet, rejoicing in the name of Pellingham truffles, went to the Highlands for a bit of quiet and rest, and it was there I heard his curious story of the skull. We were sitting over a cozy fire after dinner. It was snowing hard outside and very cold. Our pipes were alight, and our grog on the table, when Alan Beauchamp suddenly remarked, "It's a deuced curious thing for a man to be always followed about the place by a confounded grinning skull." "Eh, what?" I said. "Who the deuce is being followed about by a skull? It's rubbish and quite impossible." "Not a bit," said my friend. "I've had a skull after me more or less for several years. It sounds like a remark a lunatic would make." I rejoined rather crossly. "Do not talk bunkum. You'll go dotty if you believe such infernal rot." "It is not bunkum or rot," said Alan. "It's gospel truth. Ask Truffles, ask Jack Weston, or Jimmy Darkgood, or any of my South Country pals." "I don't know Jack Weston or Jimmy Darkgood," I said, "but tell me the whole story, and someday, if it's good, I'll put it in the St. Andrews Citizen." "Well, it's mostly about St. Andrews," said Beauchamp, "so here goes. But shove on some coals first." I did so, and then requested him to fire away. It was long, long ago, I think about the year 1513, that one of my ancestors, a man called Neville de Beauchamp, resided in Scotland. It seemed he was an uncommonly wild dog, went for racing and cards, and could take... Hang on a second, I got something on here that shouldn't be on here. And could take his wine and ale with any of them, even in those hard-drinking days. He was known as Flash Neville. Later, he married a pretty girl, the daughter of a silk mercer in Perth, who, it seems, died, they said of a broken heart, 2 years after. Neville de Beauchamp was seized with awful remorse, and became shortly after a monk in Greyfriars Monastery at St. Andrews. After Neville's wife's death, her relations seem to have been on the hunt after him, burning for revenge, and the girl's brother, a rough wild dog in those stormy days, at last managed to track his quarry down in the monastery of St. Andrews. "Very interesting," I said. "That monastery stood very nearly on the site of the present infant school, and we found that in 1880. Well, what did his brother do then?" "It seems that one afternoon, after vespers, he forced his way into the monastery chapel, sought out Neville de Beauchamp, and removed his head with the sword in the aisle of the kirk. Now a queer thing happened. His body fell on the floor, but the severed head, with a wild scream, flew up to the chapel ceiling and vanished through its roof." Mighty queer that, I said. The body was reverently buried, went, went on Ellen, but the head never was recovered, and, whirling through the air over the monastery screaming and groaning most pitifully, it used to cause great terror to the monks and the others on nights. It was a well-known story, and few cared to venture in that locality after nightfall. The head soon became a skull, and since that time has always haunted some member of the House of Beauchamp. Now comes a strange thing. I went, a few years ago, and lived in rooms at St. Andrews for a change, and while there I heard of my uncle's death, somewhere abroad. I had never seen him, but I had frequently heard that he was very much perplexed and worried by the tender attentions paid him by the skull of Neville de Beauchamp, which was always turning up at odd times and in unexpected places. This is a grand tale, I said. Now, I come on the job, said Alan ruefully. That uncle was the very last of our family, and I wondered if that skull would come my way. I felt very ill and nervous after I got the news of my uncle's death. A strange sense of depression and oppression overcame me, and I got very restless. One stormy evening, I felt impelled by some strange influence to go out. I wandered about the place for several hours and got drenched. I felt as if I was walking in my sleep, or as if I had taken some drug or other. Then I had a sort of vision. I had just rounded the corner of North Bell Street, now called Greyfriars Garden, I remarked. Yes. Well, when we got around that corner, I saw a large, strange building before me. I opened. I opened a wicket gate and entered what I found to be the chapel. Service was over, the lights were being extinguished, and the air was laden with incense. As I knelt in a corner of the chapel, I saw the whole scene, the tragedy of which I had heard, enacted all over again. I saw that monk in the aisle. I saw a man rush in and remove his head. I saw the body fall and the head fly up with a shriek to the roof. When I came to myself, I found I was sitting on the low wall of the school. I was very cold and wet, and I got up to go home. As I rose, I saw lying on the pavement at my feet what appeared to be a small football. I gave it a vicious kick, when, to my horror, it turned over, and I saw it was a skull. It was gnashing its teeth and moaning. Then, with a shriek, it flew up in the air and vanished. A horrible thing. Then I knew the worst. The skull of the monk Neville de Beauchamp had attached itself to me for life. I being the last of the race, since it is almost always with me. Where is it now? I asked, shuddering. Not very far away, you bet, he said. It's a most unpleasant tale, I said. Good night. I'm off to bed after that. I was in my first sleep about an hour afterwards when a knock came at my door, and the valet came in. Sorry to disturb you, sir, he said, but the skull has just come back. It's in the next room. Would you like to see it? Certainly not, I roared. Get away and let me go to sleep. Then and there, I firmly resolved to leave next morning. I hated skulls, and I fancied that probably it might take a fancy to me, and I had no desire to be followed about the country by a skull, as if it was a fox terrier. Next morning, I went to breakfast. Where is that beastly skull? I said to Alan. Oh, it's off again somewhere. Heaven knows where. But I have had another vision, a waking vision. What was that? Well, said Alan, I saw the skull and a white hand which seemed to beckon to me beside it. Then they slowly receded, and in their place was what looked like a big sheet of paper. On it, in large letters, were the words, Your friend, Jack Weston, is dead. This morning, I got this wire telling me of his sudden death. Read it. That afternoon, I left Highlands and Ellen Beauchamp. Since then, I have constant letters from him from his home in England. He has tried every means possible to get rid of that monk's skull, but they are of no avail. It always returns. So he has made the best he can of it and keeps it in a locked casket in an empty room at the end of a wing of the old house. He says it keeps fairly quiet, but on stormy nights, wails and gruesome shrieks are heard from the casket in that closed apartment. I heard from him last week. He said, Dear WTL, I don't think I mentioned that twice a year the skull of Neville de Beauchamp. vanishes from its casket for a period of about 2 days. It is never away longer. I wonder if it still haunts its old monastery at St. Andrews where its owner was slain. Do write and tell me if anyone now in that vicinity hears or sees the screaming skull of my ancestor, Neville de Beauchamp. Creepy, creepy, creepy. Next one is the Spectre of the Castle. Now, after we get done with the book, don't leave because I have something to add to the Screaming Skull story. Okay, I have something to add, so don't take off. Several years had elapsed since I met the butler of Lodstry Castle and the Highland Inn. I had just come up from the south of England for some golf and fresh air, and was looking over my letters one morning at breakfast when I opened the following missive. Sir, yours command, sir. Sir, I have not forgot our pleasant talk on that snowy night up in the far north, when you were pleased to be interested in my experiences of Lodstry. Could you very kindly meet me any day and time you choose to fix at Luchars, and oblige your obedient servant, Jeremiah Anklebone. P.S. I have something to divulge to you connected with St. Andrews that may absorb your mind. Accordingly, I fixed up the arrangements and met Mr. Anklebone at Luchars, where we went to the nearest hostelry and ordered the best lunch they had there. Jeremiah looked thinner, older, and whiter than when I last saw him, doubtless owing to his frequent communing with spirits. How is Lodstry getting on? I meekly inquired. And what of the ghosts? It is getting on fine, sir. I have had a number of new experiences since I had the pleasure of seeing you last. You must understand, sir, that my family for generations have been favored with occult powers. My father was a great seer, and my great-grandfather, Mr. Concrickety Anklebone, of the Isle of Skye, was a wonderful visionary. Concrickety Anklebone. Now, Anklebone was an interesting old fellow, but he had a tiresome habit of wandering away from his theme, and, as it were, getting off the main road into a labyrinth of byways, and one had, metaphorically, to push him out of these side lanes and place him on his feet again in the main road. Before I come to St. Andrew's Castle, he said, I must tell you about a queer episode of an astral body at Lodstry, a disentangled personality, as it were. Push along, I said, and tell me. Well, one afternoon after luncheon, the master and I were in the dining hall, when we saw a gentleman crossing the lawn towards the castle. He was a tall man in a riding dress, with curly hair and a large flowing mustache. He came up to the window and looked earnestly at us, and then walked along the gravel walk round the castle door. "Hullo," said the master. "That is my old friend, Jack Herbert, to whom I have let Lodstry for the summer. What on earth can bring him here? I'll go to the door myself and let him in. He never said he was coming." In a minute or two the master came back looking bewildered. "Anklebone," he said, "that's a very queer thing. There's nobody there." Perhaps, I suggested, the gentleman had gone round to the stables. So we both hurried off to look, but not a sign of anyone could be seen, and we stared blankly at each other. We could not make it out. 2 days after, the master got a letter from Mr. Jack Herbert, telling him he had had a bad fall off his horse and had injured his spine, and was confined to bed. Mr. Herbert went on to say that 2 days before, while he was asleep, he dreamt vividly that he was at Lodstry, that he crossed the lawn to the window of the dining hall, and, looking in, saw my master and a butler, that's me, in the room. He was going round to the front door when he awoke. Now, that was his astral body, that master and I saw. He loved Lodstry, and during sleep he came and paid us that visit. Queer, isn't it? 10 days after he died. He wanted to see the old castle before he died, and his force of willpower brought his double self, or astral body, to visit us. It is not so uncommon as people think. Numbers of people are seen in 2 places at once far apart. Look at the Archbishop Sharp of St. Andrews. He was in Edinburgh, at Holyrood, I think, and sent his servant over to post haste to St. Andrews to bring back some papers he had forgotten there. When his trusty servant went up to his study in the Novum Hispanium to get the papers from the desk. Lo, there was the Archbishop, sitting in his usual chair and scowling at him. He told the Archbishop this when he returned with the papers to Edinburgh, but his Grace sternly bade him be silent, and mentioned the matter to no one. Oh, I mentioned the matter to no one on pain of death. Now, sir, it seems that my master is able to see astral bodies, for he saw Mr. Jack Herbert. But I doubt if he could see a real spirit. Perhaps, sir, suggested Anklebone politely, you might be able to see astral bodies. Thank you very much indeed, I replied, but if I want to see anything of the sort. But I have heard a tale of an eminent man in London who took a nap in his armchair every afternoon, and while asleep appeared to his friends in different parts of the country. But I doubt the fact very much. Ah, said the butler, very solemnly, only about 1 in 1,000 has the power of visualizing real spirits. Many ordinary persons have long sight, but some have short sight. But most people are short-sighted when ghosts are visible. The ghosts are really there all the time. Some people cannot see them, but can feel their presence or touch only. Most animals can see spirits. Sometimes they are killed with terror when they see the spirits. I pulled the bell rope and ordered some spirits for the butler. I don't think that will kill you with terror, I said when it arrived. He looked grateful and remarked that talking was dry work. However interesting the subject might be. Now, look here, Mr. Anklebone, I said. You know, I dare say, the stories about the cathedral, the haunted tower, and all that. Please tell me what your experiences have been there. Anklebone's whole appearance suddenly changed. He gripped my arm violently, shivered and shuddered, and turned ghastly pale. I thought he was going to have a fit. For pity's sake, sir, he said, trembling, ask me nothing about that. There is something too terrible there, but I dare not reveal what I know and have seen to anyone. Do not allude to it again, or it will drive me mad. He lay back in his chair for a few moments, with his eyes closed and shaking all over, but he gradually recovered his usual appearance. I wish to tell you about the castle spectre, he said, weakly. I must confess that I felt nonplussed and disappointed at the turn of the conversation had taken, as whatever my private opinion was regarding the worthy Jeremiah's curious statements, still I felt anxious to find out his experiences at the cathedral, particularly. However, I swallowed my disappointment like a Trojan and begged him to proceed. He gulped down his spirits and informed me he had felt better again, but he did not seem quite himself for some time. Well, sir, he said, I often used to climb over the castle wall after dusk and smoke my pipe and meditate on all the grand folk that must have been there in the bygone days before the smash-up. I thought of lovely young Queen Mary, of Mary Hamilton and her other Marys, of Lord Darnley, of the poet Castellar, and Lord Arran, and the Duke of Rothesay, and of the Stuart kings that used to be there. Then I thought of Prior Hepburn and poor murdered Cardinal Beaton, and of the monks, knights, and lovely wenches that used to frequent the old place. I loved it, for I have read history a lot. One could not help thinking of the feasting revelry and pageants of those interesting old times, and the grand services in the churches, and what fine dresses everybody wore. I saw he was going bang off the subject again, and when he began to tell me there were lots of ankle bones in Norman times about Fifeshire, I had to pull him back with a jerk to his ghost in the castle. Very well, sir. I was at the castle one evening, and I was sitting on the parapet of the old wall when I saw a head appearing up the old broken steps on the east side of the castle that once led down to the great dining hall. I knew no one could now come up that way without a ladder from the sea beach, and when the figure got to the level ground, it came right through the iron railing, just as if no obstruction were there. I stared hard and watched the advancing figure. It looked like a woman. I had heard of the cardinal's ghost and wondered if it could be his eminence himself. Nearer and nearer it came, and although it was a gusty evening, I noticed the flowing garments of the approaching figure were quite still and unruffled by the wind. It was like a moving statue. As it passed me slowly a few yards away, I saw they were not the robes of a cardinal, but those of an archbishop. I am a churchman, and I know the garments quite well. I saw all his vestments and clearly, and I shall never forget the pale ashen face and the thin determined mouth. Then I noticed one very, very strange thing. The statuesque tall figure had a thick rope around the neck, and the end of the rope was trailing along the grass behind it, but there was no sound whatever. On it went, and began to climb the stairs to the upper apartments. I tried to follow, but could not move for a bit. I felt as if I was mesmerized or paralyzed. I was all in a cold sweat, too, and I was glad to get away from the castle, at last, and hurry home. I haven't gone so fast for many years. When I went next day to Lod Street, I made a clean breast of the whole affair to master. Would you have known him again? He asked me. I replied. I would know that face and figure among 1,000. Come to the study, said the master, and I'll show you some pictures. We went, and I looked over a number of them. At last, I came to one that fairly transfixed me. There was no mistaking the face. Before me was the picture of the spectre I had seen that previous night in the ruined castle. Well, Anklebone, said the master, this is really wonderful, and you actually saw the rope around the neck. I did, I said, as I am a living man. But who is it? It's not the cardinal. No, said the master very gravely. This man was publicly hanged by his enemies on a gibbet at the market cross of Stirling on April 1st, 1571. But who was he? I asked imploringly. The man, or ghost you saw, said master, was Archbishop John Hamilton of St. Andrews, in his own castle grounds, where he once reigned supreme. I said farewell to Mr. Anklebone, and as I thought over his extraordinary story journeying home in the train, I could not help repeating over and over again to myself that very curious name that seemed to rhyme with the motion of the train, Concrickety Anklebone. Okay, well that's going to do it for today. I just marked the page. I want to thank you all for coming, but before you go, I have kind of a story for you that kind of relates to the Screaming Skull. For those of you going, oh no, there's no Screaming Skulls. Here where I live, I'm not going to say where, Northern California, there's 3 governor's mansions. There's the old-timey governor's mansion. There's the current house that we call the mansion where our current governor lives, Gavin Newsom. Okay? For a while he lived in the old governor's mansion, which by itself is haunted. But back in the 70s, early 80s, I think back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, a new governor's mansion was built. And it was built over by the river, close to where I went to high school, actually. And nobody ever moved into it. Why? Because all that land had been Indian burial land. And back then, they didn't have the rules that they have now about Indian burial land. It was okay to build on it. Okay, they didn't have, the California has rules about that stuff that when they start finding artifacts, they have to call out anthropologists, archaeologists, and all this stuff to clear the land. And people from the tribe have to come out and approve the land and all this. Back then, they didn't do that. Okay? So what happened was that they built on this land, and the caretakers that would go through the building started to see strange things happening in the building, right? There's rumors that there's Native American apparitions in this building, but not only that, the biggest thing is that every night there's a skull that goes flying down the hallway, and it's screaming, a screaming skull, just like in this story. So nobody has ever, as far as I know, and I don't hold me to it, I tried to do some research on it on Google before the show, couldn't find anything on it. Used to be you could find it really easily on Google. So probably somebody's living in there and they decided to take all that information down. But there used to be information that you could find on that mansion. And nobody, after that point, nobody had moved in there because of the ghostly activity. Of course, the state of California never said anything like that. But everybody knows that, everybody knows about that activity. And it just makes sense that nobody's ever moved in there because obviously it's haunted. It's very haunted, And plus, I don't think I'd want to live in a house where a skull goes screaming down the hallway every night, right? So I just wanted to add that tonight. Okay, I just want to let everybody know that California Haunts now has a Substack. We're over on Substack. I'm going to be adding on a regular basis. I'm going to be adding blogs over there. I'm going to start putting together a newsletter for everybody. You guys can check us out with the newsletter. I'll have subscription stuff going. We're going to do some lives from there, for some extra ghost stories and stuff. But I just want to let you know about that. And of course, I'm not going to be doing readings tonight as far as tarot card readings go. This is my night off, but I'll be working for California Haunts Radio in here, putting stuff together. Tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Pacific, I have to let you guys know this, on California Haunts Radio on YouTube. Okay, you got to Google this, California Haunts Radio on YouTube. Sarah Chain is going to be with us, and she's going to be talking about holistic remedies for what ails you. Lots of herbal remedies and things like that. So she'll be with us at 5:30 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. Okay, but I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you again. Hopefully tomorrow over at TikTok and Clapper. And also, be sure to come over to my YouTube page, California Haunts. California Haunts. I'm 5 away from 1,000 subscribers. So whoever would like to come over and subscribe, that would be great to get me up to 1,000. I would love to do that before the end of the month. So if you could help me out with that, I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, over here on TikTok, I would like to thank you all for the gifts. Whoever gifted, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining me for this hour, and hope to see you all tomorrow, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Okay. All right, let me close it off over here, and then I'll shut you guys down, all right? See you guys tomorrow. You can find us all over the internet, so just Google California Haunts or California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team. Let me shut things down over here, and we'll call it a night. So just bear with me, you guys.